this afternoon, we're talking about the legacy and the lifetime, if you will, of Martin Luther King Jr. So what I'd like to do is, in our conversation, is I will move around a little bit, and because there's so much to say, and I'll just stick with, I'll stick within a certain boundary, at least my boundary, and I want to remind you all that his name was not Martin. He was first baptized Michael. Never knew that, did you? Michael. And it became Martin Luther King. See, this is sliding down on me. It doesn't want to sit on my nose.
You got to pinch it.
Well, I have a Roman nose. It doesn't want to be pinched. So how did he move from Michael to Martin? I know you don't know because, most people don't know this. His dad, who was a minister also, had traveled to Germany and wanted to get involved with how Martin Luther got involved with the Protestant Reformation. And I'll be brief here. You know that Martin Luther broke apart the Catholic Church. I'm a Lutheran. He broke apart the Catholic Church. He really did. And, he did not intend to do that deliberately. His intention was to reform it, and to stick to the teachings of the Bible. And as far as Martin Luther was concerned, and a little bit about that, then I'm going to leave it, is that the Catholic Church was just interested in making money, and selling indulgences, and an indulgence could get you out of hell. And then later on, selling an indulgence, whatever the marks were, that the church expanded that it'll get a family, you can get a family member out of hell as well with a certain amount of money. And then that was popular. And then we can get people out of purgatory, your wife, your children, whomever. So it was a moneymaker. And it did very well, cha-ching, 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 like an ATM machine. And Martin Luther, who was a Catholic priest, felt that was irresponsible. The church isn't about making money. It's about being graced into heaven. And it went on and on and on. And finally, the Pope, who had had enough of Martin Luther, invited him to Rome to have a sit-down, to talk this over. And Martin Luther knew what this was all about, in the 16th century. They're going to burn me at the stake as a heretic. So I'm staying in Germany to be protected, by one of the German and because what they could do is, and they did this, they took the land away from the Catholic Church and whatever monies, have been stored up in Germany. So this became in the background of Martin Luther King Sr. And he went to Germany, and he taught about it, he learned about it, and he changed his son's name from Michael to Martin Luther King, because I want my son to be a rebel, or certainly a man who would call the church to task, and I want him to be like me. So I'm going to change his name from Michael to Martin Luther King Jr. So that is the beginning of our story. Now, don't let me forget, because part of our story is also, and a very important part of our story, is Rosa Parks. And I want to come to her in a little bit. So how do we frame this? How do we frame the modern civil rights movement? And it begins, the modern civil rights movement, not with W.E.B. Du Bois, if you will, or the modern, it began with the end of the Second World War. And black American GIs, in Europe, found that European women and Europeans in general had no hang-ups on race. That when these men, I keep saying black, but they're black servicemen, went out on leave and went to a restaurant, nobody had a problem. Used a bathroom, no one had a problem. Sat on a park bench, no one had a problem. That said white only, no one had a problem. When they used a water fountain in Europe, no one had a problem. And, that white women were, white European women, were congenial, were good dancing partners, and so on and so forth. And that irritated some of the Southern soldiers, white Southern soldiers. So what Eisenhower was forced to do is he was forced to have different leave times for black servicemen and white servicemen, so there wasn't a trouble, so that the MPs, did not have to guard every door. So when these black servicemen came home, they were told by their officers that, things haven't changed. They haven't changed in Alabama. They haven't changed in Mississippi. When you go home, things have not changed. And it is still what was called de facto segregation and de jure segregation. Now, de jure segregation was by law. That posted on the bathroom door was white only, colored only, and on a park bench that one had to walk all the way across a park to be able to sit, because all the benches were marked by, de jure, by law, white only or colored only. The word was colored. And they came back, these men, some women, came back and said, we want to change things. In Europe, there was no problem in Europe. There was no white only or colored only. None of that. And again, these men were told by their officers, nothing has changed since you left in 40 or 41. And not only is there de jure segregation, but also, and this was tough because it shifted from town to town, it shifted from state to state, Virginia to Mississippi, and it was called de facto. And this was troublesome. In fact, de facto. And in other words, you know that when you were home in Mississippi, it still is today, in fact, de facto, that you did not make eye contact with white women. Drop your eyes. That you stepped aside on the sidewalk to allow white families to pass. And not to do so could get you in trouble, a beating, a burning, later on a lynching and so forth. And black women, and this rarely gets in the history books, is when they went shopping, and it became finally you only shopped on Saturday, that when you went into a department store to try on a hat, a pair of shoes, gloves, a dress, you did not try them on. You looked them over, and you hoped that you were picking the right size, even though your weight may have changed. Because what you did was, and this is their word, not my word, if you tried on a pair of shoes or a hat or a pair of gloves, you made them, and this is their word, not my word, you made them greasy. Greasy. That a white woman is not going to buy a pair of shoes that she saw a black woman put on. So you shopped on Saturdays. And for some women, black women, would order by mail, because if it came by address and by mail, your name oftentimes did not portray your race. So this is what they're up against. And never mind voting yet. I'll get to that in a little bit. So nothing has changed here. And if you complain, you might not get your mail delivered. And that could lead to other problems, couldn't it? You owe for the rent, for a mortgage, for a car payment. I never got it. Well, you never got it because we burned it at the post office. We know where you live. You never got your trash picked up. So there were consequences for being a big mouth, for complaining. And people knew that. Keep your head down. Eyes on the prize, not for you. So these men and some women coming back from Europe saying, we want to change the situation. Now, Martin Luther King Jr. was caught up in that. Not just yet, but he will be caught up in it because he's going to meet Coretta, his soon-to-be wife. Martin Luther, not Michael, Martin Luther spent a lot of time in Boston. And a great deal of time in Boston. He went to BU, didn't he? And by the way, when he lived in Alabama, he lived in a prosperous black neighborhood. It wasn't dangerous and difficult and so forth. So he didn't experience, some of the more radical and dangerous threats. He read about them, he saw it, but he lived in a prosperous black neighborhood. He went to Moorhead College, and then came north and went to BU. He went to BU to study to be a minister, and he got his PhD in theology. And now what I do? And while he was there, he met Coretta, soon to be Mrs. King. Coretta wanted no part of Martin at all, no part. He's too short. We don't look right on the dance floor or in a photograph. You know, I'm tall. You know, I'm 5'9", 5'10", tall for a woman, if you will. He's too short. You know, he won't look right on the dance floor. He'll be trying to lead, and I'll be tripping over him. Furthermore, he was persistent. You know how guys are persistent, you know. You know, when they've locked in on you, and that's the word, when they've locked in on you, they are persistent. And he locked in on Coretta. And he locked in on her by accident. He shared a cup of coffee with her at a table at a BU, not function, you know, in the BU cafeteria. And he was smitten by her. And as he said to her, and I can just see her closing the door when he walked her home and saying, oh, Lord, I'm going to have to deal with him. Not only is he too short, but he's eloquent. And he's just said to me, I have met my Waterloo. You have captured my heart. Ay, ay, ay. And Coretta, you have to believe in the ABC. He could speak. He had a voice. You have to believe in the ABC of our relationship. Here we go. ABC. Admit to it, believe in it, commit to it. And this is a young lady who wants to go to New York and sing. You know, maybe not be an actress, but to be a vocalist, you know, to play the violin. And I got this guy chasing me. You know, I've met my Waterloo, and you're too short. And when can we get married? Never. You know how that happens, right? Never. I'm never going to marry you. Oh, yes, you are. You know, because I'm gonna pursue you. Daddy found out about it. And he talked to his son about it. And they talked about it, and she said, I'm never going, she's from Alabama too, you know, Coretta. I'm never going back to the South. I know Alabama. It's all about segregation. I'm never going back. I want to go to New York. I want to live in New York. And he persisted and persisted. Guys make all kinds of promises, don't they? I know they do. And rarely do they deliver on them. He's a Coretta. I'm a minister. I've just been ordained a minister. I will offer you this. I need experience. I need resume experience. I've been offered a position in Alabama, Montgomery, Alabama, the first capital of the Confederacy. What a place to start, huh? Montgomery, Alabama, the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. And they need another minister because there's been nothing but trouble from the other ministers. For example, there were too many names on the checkbook. The money was disappearing from the collection plates. And so they interviewed him, and they wanted a minister who was cerebral, thoughtful, you know, who could talk the talk and talk the Bible. And they didn't want some minister who was, you know, hip, hip, hurrah, and everybody up pounding their chest. You know, we want a thoughtful, cerebral minister who will teach the Bible as it ought to be taught. And we want to bring you down for an audition. And they liked what they heard. They liked what they saw, and they offered him a position. And he told Coretta, they've offered me a position, and I'm signing a contract. And will you come with me? And my father has agreed to marry us. But I've told him that you said to me that I will love and honor you, but I will not obey you. You know the old love, honor, and obey. I will not obey you. And he said, you're going to have trouble with that woman. You're going to have trouble with her. And this is early, mid-50s. I mean, today everybody writes their own dialogue, if you will. You're going to have trouble, Martin, with that lady. She won't say obey. You're the man. You're the minister. So he agreed, and Dad agreed to omit obey. And Coretta, 2 years in Alabama. 2 years to get resume experience, and then we're going back north. New York, whatever. I need resume experience. And they're going to leave. We're going back home. And they've given us a residence. Part of the deal is I'm going to get, we're going to get a home here. She agreed reluctantly. The day they were married, they had to stay, overnight in the guest room of the local undertaker because they couldn't get a room in an Alabama hotel. White only, white only, white only. And he said, this is not what I want. He said, Coretta, 2 years and we're out. Didn't happen, did it? 2 years and we're out. Give me that break. I promise you, from my heart to your heart. Not to your heart, but to the heart. He said, if I take this job, and by the way, he became the highest paid minister in Montgomery, and that offended some of the other black ministers. He was young, 25 years old, young, from the north, eloquent, and he was the minister of a highly respected church, and he said, it will only be my name on the checkbook, and I want all of you, if you are going to join the church, you must register to vote. I don't want any grief on that. We are voting. You can see the trouble coming. And he was vocal. He was articulate. Now, they also told him, the hiring committee, we forgot to mention to you that you have to be president of what was called the MIA Association. Let me say it again. I stumbled over those words because of the mask. The MIA Association, Montgomery Improvement Association. Never heard of it? Well, it's in the fine print. A lot of things are in the fine print, aren't they? It's in the fine print. It's like the day after you get married, today, in 2022. Okay, and now what do we do? We got married on Saturday. We went on a 3-day honeymoon. Now what do we do? Well, you know the rest of that story. So part of the deal was they got a home, next to the church. And the Montgomery Improvement Association was not a radical association. What they wanted is to be able to try on clothes, to have our women try on clothes, to make sure they fit, to make sure that shoe fits and it's comfortable to walk on. That we can sit anywhere in the park, use any water fountain, that hire some black officers and train them in sensibility, how you handle an arrest of a black man or a woman. I'm leading up to Rosa Parks. He said, okay. Well, that grew into and will become part of the bus boycott. Now, there had been, and it was the bus driver was the law. He was the sheriff on that bus. And when you put your dime in the turnstile, if you're a black man or woman, you put your dime in a turnstile, and then you get off the bus, and you walk to the back of the bus. And the bus driver would open the door. And you get into the back of the bus, and you would sit at the rear of the bus, black only. The front of the bus, white only. The middle of the bus was no man's land. That if there was no seating in a black, on the strap or seated, that you could walk to the middle and sit in a row. There was an aisle, and there were two seats and two seats. And if the aisle was not full, and you were the only person seated in that aisle, a black woman or a black man, you could sit there. But if the front of the bus was occupied by white clients, you had to get up. You had to get up and move to the back, because the aisle was now unofficially reserved for black riders, white riders rather. Rosa Parks was a seamstress, and a good one. And it was when she got out of bed on December 1st, 1955, and she did not say to her husband, Ray, so this turned him into a hard-drinking alcoholic, what's to come. She did not get up out of bed on December 1 to go to work and to say, today's the day, Ray, I'm going to challenge segregated seating. She had worked all day. She was tired. She had done some Christmas shopping. She had brought some bundles with her. And she was waiting on the corner for the bus. 75% of the ridership was black. Most black families did not own automobiles. They walked to work or they took the bus. Montgomery, 50% black, 70% white. So the owners of the bus company depended on black riders, front and back. And in the middle was no man's land. And by the way, that bus, where the incident took place, was bought by Henry Ford, and it's at the Ford Foundation Museum. Now you can see it, you can step in, but you can't sit in the seat that Rosa Parks challenged, and something in the universe moved. When the bus pulled up, it was raining. She was tired. She was encumbered with gifts. And the door opened, and she recognized the driver, Blake. His name was James Blake, and he had a reputation for being especially verbally violent. And she knew that. She knew of him and had seen him operate. In the summer, he would roll down the windows and just shout epithets, expletives, at blacks who were walking. She knew this guy. She knew of him. She'd been on the bus when he had done this. Now, what did she do? She was the secretary for the NAACP. She was quiet, diminutive. She was not trouble, had never been arrested. So when she went to work on December 1, it wasn't the day she said to her husband, I'm going to challenge segregated seating. She was tired. Put her dime in, went to the back, and Blake opened the door. Sometimes he wouldn't, and he would just drive away. Some of the other drivers would just drive away and keep the dime. It wasn't the dime. It was the disrespect. Just don't open the doors and drive away. It was the disrespect. But she got on the bus, came from the front to the middle, and sat down in an empty row, 1, 2, 3, 4. And the bus up front began to become crowded, and there were no seats, or only a few seats available for the whites who wanted to be seated. And she didn't make any trouble. She was on the outside, and if you want to get by, like we do, if you want to get by. And Blake, the driver, was watching her because she would not get up and move to the back of the bus. And he was watching her through the mirror. And sometimes when you're being watched, you can feel it. You can feel the eyes on you. And she did not look up and make eye contact. And eye contact can speak volumes, can it? If you're a teacher, eye contact can speak volumes, can it? We all know that, and a good instructor knows how to use her eyesight, eye contact, or just stop in the middle of what you're saying and then say to somebody, I'm sure you have something to say, because what you're saying is much more important than what I'm talking about. It must be. So, Jimmy, why don't you get up and say what you were talking about and share it with all of us? You know how that works. I used to supervise student teachers for Stonehill and Framingham, and I would always tell them, when you're the teacher, you own that room. not with your personality, with your eye contact. You know, you own that room. Do you remember, if I do, you do, do you remember when, this has got to be 100 years ago, when a teacher walked into the room, everyone stood? Anybody remember that? Yep. You stood. Out of respect. You stood. And then, okay, boys and girls, sit down. Do you remember that, Phil? You stood out of respect. And then the teacher who walked into the room, please be seated, boys and girls. Boy, that doesn't happen today, does it? Different days, different days. So she knows the bus driver is making eye contact with her, and she looks away. Then he stops the bus, comes down, and I'm sure they have an expletive conversation. And he says, if you don't get up, sister or auntie, I'm going to call the cops and have you arrested. And then something shifted in the universe. She looked over, looked at him, and said, you may. The key word there is may. Yes, you may have me arrested. And she was arrested. There was no struggle. Brought down to the police headquarters, and was a misdemeanor, and fined $50 or $10 or whatever, and got home. And of course, the word had spread through the black community. Rosa Parks has been arrested. The leader, his name was Nixon, the leader of the local NAACP, had been looking to challenge segregated seating. Now, and there have been a lot of young black girls, who were mouthy and so forth. But Rosa Parks is the ideal defendant. Quiet, the secretary of the local NAACP. Rosa Parks, as of this afternoon, still this afternoon, is the only woman to lie in state in the National Rotunda. She wanted no part of this, no part. And word has spread quickly. Ray had heard about it, and he said, Rosa, what have you done? You're going to lose your job. And she did. We're going to have our rent raised, and then we can't afford it. The rent was raised, they were evicted. Rosa, what have you done? One of the strategies was on the part of whites is that they knew who Rosa was. And she would walk to the store, to get a loaf of bread or, I want to say, a pack of cigarettes. I'm sure she didn't smoke. And cars would slow down and follow her, driven by white guys. And as they followed her, she could see them, and they would roll down the windows and stick out shotguns. Now that is, am I going to get my head blown off? Am I going to get a shotgun blast in the back? Come on. There's no protection. Or you'd go into the store to buy a quart of milk, and the clerk would not recognize that you were there, and you would put the money on the counter and then take the quart of milk, and the cops would come and arrest you for stealing because no one would take your money. Your money was greasy. Rosa Parks developed an ulcer the size of a watermelon later on. Back to her story. Ed Nixon, the head of the local NAACP, we're looking for the ideal defendant in this. Rosa, you are the ideal defendant. And we're going to use the strategy that had been used in Louisiana of not riding the buses. And that brought financial ruin to the bus company. And it took a week. It took a week for in Louisiana for the boycott to work because you're hurting the ownership financially. Now, in the meantime, and I told you I'm going to jump around a little bit. In the meantime, that the Earl Warren, who had now been named the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, he and his fellow colleagues had unanimously, wrote a decision in favor of the Board of Education. That black schools are the equivalent of white schools in terms of the heating, furniture, textbooks, and so forth, the quality of their teachers. And I'm just generalizing in a very quick way. And the fear was that would lead to desegregation elsewhere. Now remember, the Kansas, the Board of Education ruling, with all deliberate speed, this is below the Mason-Dixon line, that schools have to be, the furniture, the heating, the quality of the textbooks, the quality of the teachers, has to be leveled out as best you can. With all deliberate speed. That's the phrase, isn't it? With all deliberate speed. And whatever deliberate means, and whatever speed means, with all deliberate speed. So all of this is mixed up in the boycott that's to follow. Rosa Parks, as I said, lost her job. The rent went up. They were evicted. And Ray wanted to move to Detroit. Eventually, they will move to Detroit. It gets to be too much after a while, doesn't it? You're on everybody's hit list. And you're a young woman. You're a middle-aged woman. And you walk into the store, and the car slows down, and the shotgun gets pointed out of the rear window. What am I going to do? Hide in the bushes? That must have been scary, do you think? You got nowhere to go. And Ray wants to go to Detroit. And now he's drinking more. So this became part of, I'm coming back now to Martin Luther King. We are going to boycott the bus company. We are going to model ourselves after what happened in Louisiana. We are not going to ride the buses. And when the bus company loses money, it'll be first come, first serve. And the owners of the bus company said, okay, we'll accept the challenge because we know how long this boycott will last. The first day it rains, it's over. First day it snows. I mean, it does snow in Montgomery on occasion. On occasion, it's over. Or it's too hot to walk. It's over. That never happened. These men and women walked for 365, 385 days. Or the few black cab drivers who did not lose their medallions would pile in my cab, and I'll charge you a dime. When the local fares among the white cab drivers like 45 or 50 cents. We're going to break this, and we're going to break it. We are going to break it financially, King. No violence. No violence. No burning the buses. No lying down in front of the buses. No packing the buses. Before I forget, right now, I'm going to separate out my words. All of you, your homework tonight. You ready for this? Write it down. Write it down. Your homework for tonight is to read a letter when King was arrested later on in Birmingham. He was arrested over 30 times. And he wrote while in jail in Birmingham. It's called a letter from a Birmingham jail. Read it tonight. It is written on toilet paper, given to a sensitive prison guard who smuggled it out. Letter from a Birmingham jail. And in it is all what I'm talking about. Peaceful protests. We've been waiting since 1619. I've got an itchy nose because of this mask. I'm one of these guys who does not like being told what to do. That's why I stayed after school so often. It's okay. Letter from a Birmingham jail. And in it, there is King. Peaceful protest. Do not burn the buses. Do not lie down in front of them. Do not pack them. Letter from a Birmingham jail. It's all there. Written on toilet paper. Smuggled out by a sympathetic guard. And what he does is he begins by criticizing the ministers in Birmingham. You're blaming me because I brought the movement to Birmingham. They called it Birmingham. I'm bringing the message of the gospel. And now I'm in jail with many, many others. Letter from a Birmingham jail. It's all there. You don't have to read anything else. It's all there. Now, or you can read Why We Can't Wait. Small, thin paperback. Why We Can't Wait. As I said, we've been waiting since the Emancipation Proclamation. We've been waiting since 1619 when the first blacks were arrived to work the cotton fields or the tobacco fields or the rice fields. If you read it, and read it carefully, read it out loud to yourself, it's all there. It's a Sermon on the Mount, kind of expanded a little bit. Okay, just in case Lisa walks by. I don't take direction well. I never have. That's why I spent so many times after school. You know how I made my money after school or during? You know how I went to parochial school for a while because my stepmother thought I needed the discipline. You know, I'm a Protestant, a Lutheran, and I need to. I've been baptized 4 times, by the way. You know, I have been, to drive the devil out of me. He's still there. And so the way I made money, the nuns would put up on the blackboard the names of kids, classmates who had to stay after school. Anybody remember that? Because they would forget. So what I would do when the nuns gathered for lunch in the convent for 25, 50, 75 cents, my prices went up, that I would erase the names. I'll take your name off the board for 75 cents. And if I like you, I'll take it off the board for half a buck. Nobody would remember. But every once in a while, I'd have to stay after school because I would get caught with that. That's why I made a few bucks. You got your lunch money that way. I won't tell you the rest of the story. Remember when they passed at church services, they would pass not the bucket, the basket around to make the contribution? It's another way. Because you dumped the cash into a big basket. That's all I'm going to say. You can figure the rest of that out. That was lunch money. I'm still alive. Lightning hasn't struck me yet. But I did get into that accident. So, Rosa goes home. Ray, we don't need this. We don't need this. And King is approached by, I forgot his first name, Nixon. I think it's E.D. Nixon, who was a local leader of the NAACP. We're going to boycott the buses. Nothing, and King said, nothing violent. We're just not going to walk, like they did in Louisiana. And it'll be over in a week. And they walked. And they walked. And they walked in the heat. And they walked in the snow. And the owners of the bus company, it'll be over in a week. Well, it was not. They walked. It was 365 or 385 days. It walked. And it became a national news story. Now, King was arrested again by the cops. And the cops were always looking to harass people. And you'd be arrested if your tail light was out or you didn't give a directional. Remember? You did not give the hand directional properly. Maybe you did, it didn't matter. You're being arrested for violating traffic safety. Remember that? I do. I didn't get my license the first time out. I wasn't emphatic enough. Okay. I'll come back next week and take the test again. It happens. The second time I took it, I got to tell a little story here. I used my grandfather's car, an old Oldsmobile. He never told me that I never used it, didn't use it. The brake for rolling downhill didn't work. I didn't know that. So the cop has you do some parallel parking, put on the emergency brake. The car kept moving. It went downhill. Sometimes you have to learn how to survive. We're going to walk, and we're going to walk. King was arrested, and this story got into the North, into the New York Times. King got arrested. You ready for this? For driving 30 miles an hour in a 25-hour zone, 5 miles over the speed limit. And all these operators, these black agitators in the NAACP, were tailed by the cops. So he was arrested for that. And I'm trying to pull this out of my mind. And he had a choice, either a $500 fine or like a couple of weeks in jail. But that got north. That story got north. And as the northern press picked it up, they sent down photographers. And they sent down story writers. And finally, the owners of the bus company lifted the bus boycott. That first come, first serve. They were losing money. And 70% of the riders were black. And they're losing money. And they lost money during the Christmas season. That's when Rosa Parks was first arrested. And they continued to lose money. And finally they said, enough is enough. And it was first come, first serve. That story went north as well as remember Brown versus the Board of Education. That schools below the Mason-Dixon line, had to be desegregated. So King became the face, the voice of the modern civil rights movement. And he said, no, I'm a drummer. That's all. He said, I'm a drummer. All I'm doing is having people pay attention to this. And he used the word, all I'm doing is a drummer. There are hundreds, now thousands of people who support me. Not me, but the cause. I'm just a drummer. I'm bringing attention to it. But he became the voice, the face, if you will, of the modern civil rights movement. Now, there were many, many others who were jealous of King. And what he did is, I'm not going to break up the NAACP. I'm going to form my own organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, NCLC. And I don't want to break up your organization. I want to make sure this is peaceful protest. That's all that it is, and nonviolent. But he died violently, didn't he? Nonviolent. He appeared on the cover of Newsweek, Time magazine. He became the voice. He said, I'm not the voice. There are hundreds, now thousands of me. And if you've ever been to the mall in Washington, D.C., you've seen the statue to him, haven't you? And the fact that the woman who was chosen was an Asian would not have bothered him. This is what it's all about. He would have supported that. If you look at it, it's rather interesting, isn't it? It's like a white caramel marble. He almost looks like he's a white guy, but he's not, obviously. And he appeared on Face the Nation and so forth. And he became, as I said, the voice of the modern civil rights movement. He said, it's not me. There's CORE. There are many other organizations. But folks became jealous of him. And the line we remember from the 1963, when he went to Washington, D.C., Kennedy has been elected. And by the way, he supported Kennedy. And Kennedy was quite adamant in keeping his distance from this. He needed white voters. This is 1963. So, the march in Washington, 30,000 people. And Kennedy said, I will support this, and we'll make sure there's no trouble. I want the bars closed. I'm going to keep a division of American soldiers on the other side of the Potomac River. The cops will be there, not in uniform, but in plain clothes. No German shepherds. German shepherds reminded people of in Birmingham, the marches in Birmingham, where Bull Connor, the fire hoses and the German Shepherds. And, I mean, the pressure on those fire hoses, to break up a demonstration. You could knock people down with the pressure of the fire hose. And you can see the film. Pick them up and spin them over a car. Roll them down the street. Smash them against a tree. The pressure on a fire hose could knock out the bark of the cement of a building, holding bricks together. So and children as well, getting hit by this. So this is becoming national. TV helped enormously. And so the New York Times is down there. The buses are now desegregated, first come, first serve. And we want Rosa Parks sitting at the front of the bus. Mrs. Parks, please, we want to film your seating. And she said, no, I'm done. I'm moving. I don't want this. Some things come to you and you don't want them. They just come to you. And as Coretta trying to push Martin away, some things just come to you and you try to push them away. And it's like, as I would tell my students, you have to remember this. The questions, why am I here? I would point to one of them, why am I here? Does it matter that I'm here? And I don't mean in the schoolroom, being born. Why am I here? Does it matter that I'm here? And it does. And what am I supposed to do? The existential questions. Why am I here? Does it matter that I'm here? What am I supposed to do? And some things catch up with you, don't they? And you can't bob and weave. They just catch up with you, and you can ignore or you can respond. Rosa Parks, I never wanted this. And she was chosen because she had no record, had never been arrested, the ideal defendant. And Ray said, as I said, Rosa, what have you done? You're going to lose your job. And she did, as I said, and other consequences. So King sat, great story here. King sat, first row, first seat, sat here. And Rosa Parks wants to sit next to him. We need to get a white guy to sit next to King. So they asked one of the photographers to sit next to King, one of the photographers from New York. Take off your jacket that says New York Times or Yankees and sit next to King and look bitter and harassed and angry. And that's the picture that went north. And the other photograph that went north is Rosa Parks. You've seen this. It's in all the textbooks, looking out the window. And it's raining, isn't it? You remember that? Well, yeah, it was raining because there was someone standing on the roof of the bus with a fire hose. Make it look like it's raining, because she refused she didn't refuse to board that bus. And that led to all that I've chatted about. I have a dream. And Kennedy, when you come to Washington, you've got to promise me, everybody's out by nightfall. I don't want any trouble. I want everybody out by nightfall. And they were. And they had sandwiches, packed lunches for those who came. And the word that was passed around the crowd, make sure you eat it before noontime. Mayonnaise. And you're going to get salmonella. So eat this before noontime. We don't want everybody barfing. The I Have a Dream speech. Now, that speech, and I'll leave with this. We can chat about this. I Have a Dream. He had been working with that theme in other minor speeches around the country. He'd been working it, just working it. Like you and I would, work on a speech, and revising it. He'd been working on it. And Mahalia Jackson, who was sitting behind him, said, Martin, talk about the speech, mention the speech. Now, he was just working it through in his head. And spontaneously, without notes, he threw his notes away, and he gave the country, the I Have a Dream speech. And he had just been working the thoughts through. And he discarded, and he went, he just did it spontaneously. And we all remember that. And Kennedy, get out of town. Get out of town before the sun goes down. And I will invite you and other leaders into the White House for a cup of tea. And then everybody, get out of town. So, Kennedy did not want to be photographed with, who was it? Sammy Davis Jr., because he married a white woman. And I don't want to be photographed with him. It was I think she was from Sweden. I can't remember her name. But she was white with long blonde hair. Anybody catch the name for me?
Marilyn Monroe?
Who? No. She had promised to marry me. Never happened, Phil. And I promised her everything. So before we, good timing. A question. Take your mask down so I can hear you. A question, an observation, a memory. Maybe you marched. Maybe you participated. I don't know. I mean, everybody has their own story. We tell our story, don't we? All I do is remember it for you. I mean, you can tell the story as well as I can. Better. And I'm just, telling the story, and we're doing it this month because of King's birthday. Oh. King always believed that he would be assassinated. He did. J. Edgar Hoover, FBI, King is the most dangerous man in America. He is a communist. And the civil rights movement is communist inspired to disrupt the social mobility of the country. King knew that. He knew that somebody would get him. I'm a drummer, but somebody's going to get me because I'm a target. Like Rosa Parks was a potential target. And he was in Memphis, Tennessee to support a strike by the trash guys because they were not being paid the same salary as the white guys who picked up the trash. So they were on strike. And King went up there to support the strike. And that's where he that's where he gave that speech or those remarks. And you can see this, and he's sweating. It's hot. He's perspiring. He knows something is coming for him. He knows it's coming at some point. I see the promised land. You've seen the speech or heard it. I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I've seen the promised land. It's there. And that night he was gunned down, wasn't he? By James Earl Ray, who had been stalking him. And the king entourage, so we're staying here for X number of days. Here's the hotel room. James Earl Ray, booked a room right across from his room, across the street, so that he could see him come out when he came out on the balcony to grab a cigarette. King smoked Cools, and he liked Dewar Scotch. And so before he was going to give a speech and be there at a dinner and dress up in his tux, he had stepped out on the balcony to grab a cigarette. And James Earl Ray had brought a .30-06 rifle with him. Now that can take down an 800-pound deer, and kept it, right by the bathroom window, because that window overlooked the balcony. He kept it there, and I'll check to see if he's on that balcony. And that evening, he came out, getting dressed, and he got him. Blew his chest wide open, and you can see him lying there, and I can visualize it. You just see the tops of his shoes, the photograph. And he got out of the country, James Earl Ray. He's J. Edgar Hoover, the most violent man in America, the most dangerous man in America. And J. Edgar Hoover, I've always wondered, see, I'm not a conspiratorialist, but J. Edgar Hoover really did not make much of an attempt to find out who shot King down. He got out of the country. How the heck do you get out of the country when everybody's looking for you, or they're supposed to look for you? And I'm not a conspiratorialist, but I've always believed, that he was given money to get this guy, to get King somewhere, somehow, and he did. Thank you for coming and being my guest.